In this demonstration, I want to show a few more animation techniques, in particular, how to use the parent and link column in After Effects, as well as the Auto Bezier type of keyframes. And then we'll also talk about how to render graphics with alpha channels. So what I have here is a layered Photoshop file where each part of the graphic that I want to be able to animate is on a separate layer. Okay, so this is what it looks like in Photoshop. Layers are all named descriptively. I'm going to go ahead and close out of Photoshop and jump over to After Effects. And so inside of After Effects, I'll go ahead and import that Photoshop file. And when I get the layer options, I'm going to make sure and choose composition, retain layer sizes. So like I talked about in the previous lessons, if we want to bring in a layered Photoshop or layered Illustrator file with all the layers separate, we bring it in as a composition. And if we're going to animate the layers, we use composition, retain layer sizes. I don't have any layer styles on any of my layers, so I'll just go ahead and hit OK. Now, when you import a Photoshop file as a composition, it creates that composition automatically, so all you have to do is double-click it and open it up. And it's going to be whatever the document size of your Photoshop file was, so it's not necessarily going to be a standard frame size. It'll be whatever the dimensions of your Photoshop document were. Now the timeline already has all the layers and everything ready to go, but I'm not ready to animate just yet. I need to go through some basic setup steps and set my anchor points for all of my layers so that things rotate the way that I want them to. See, right now, if I were to rotate that upper leg layer, of course it's going to rotate from an anchor point in the center of the layer. So I'm going to take a moment to use my anchor point tool and go through all of my layers and test out the rotation. Make sure that my layers are rotating from the place that I want them to. I'll hit Command Z to undo my testing, and basically just going to click through my layers and move the anchor points, test the rotation, and make sure everything's good. Keyboard shortcuts for the anchor point tool is the letter Y for anchor point tool and the letter W for the rotate tool. So if you don't want to have to keep going to the toolbar, you can use those keyboard shortcuts. So letter Y to activate the anchor point tool, letter W to activate the rotation tool. Of course, Command Z to undo. Now for the torso layer, I'm going to put the anchor point kind of at the waist so that when it rotates from the waist. And the arms in this case, for this character, I didn't bother breaking the arms up at the elbow or at the wrist into separate layers. Of course, you could if you wanted to, but keeping the demonstration kind of on the simple side here, I left the arms just as one layer for each. Now for the head, I'll put the anchor point kind of at the top of the neck so that when I rotate it, it rotates from the neck. And then you'll see that I've put the neck on its own layer for some reason. Put the anchor point for that kind of at the collarbone area there, so that when I rotate it, it rotates from the bottom. Okay. Now, obviously, when I rotate some of these layers, like the upper leg, for example, the lower leg gets left behind. So the next setup step that I need to go through is to link things together. Now, in a previous lesson, I showed how you could group things together by precomposing, but in this case, I don't want to precompose and group things because that would remove the layers from this current composition. So instead of precomposing to group things together, I'm going to use the parent and link column to link layers together. Now, if the parent and link column is not showing on your screen, you can right-click anywhere along this header bar to get to the columns submenu, and then you can choose it, parent and link. Make sure that that column is showing. Now, the way the parent and link feature works is basically the layer that you choose is going to become the child of the layer that you link to. That means it's going to follow it. So in this case, I would take the lower leg layers, and then from the parent and link column, I can either click on the pop-up menu and choose the layer that I want to link to, or you can use this pick whip button and drag to the layer you want to link to. So for each of the legs, I'm going to link the lower part of the leg to the corresponding upper part of the leg. That way, when the upper leg rotates, see how the lower leg stays connected to it. Now for the upper legs, I'm not going to link those to anything. And I'll come up here though, and for the arms, I'm going to link those to the torso. So both of the arms get linked to the body. That way when the body or torso rotates, the arms go with it. The arms follow it. And then the neck, I will link to the torso. But then the head, I will link to the neck. So we can have multiple levels of linkage going on here. So the head is connected to the neck. If the neck rotates, you see the head rotates with it. But if the body rotates, the neck and the head go with it. So use the parent and link column to link together layers as needed. Just remember that the layer that you choose is the child of the layer that you link to. That means that it will follow the movement or rotation or scale of that parent layer. So that's why they call it the parent column. Okay, now those are my setup steps. Now I'm ready to animate. And in this example, what I'm doing is I'm creating an element. I'm creating an element of the character walking. I'm making a walk cycle, so basically just going to have the character walk in place and create a simple animation cycle of the character walking that I can use in another composition later. So I'm going to select my leg layers. I'm going to hit R for rotation, and I'm going to go ahead and animate the rotation for all four of these leg layers. I'll start by putting in a starting pose. So I'll have this leg here out in front, this leg here out in back. That's going to be my starting pose. I'm going to go a second forward. And then I need to create a crossover pose so that it looks like he's taking a step. So that means the leg in front is starting to slide back. The leg that was in back is crossing over. It's picking up and bending at the knee. That's what's going to make it look like a step. I'll go one more second forward. And now the legs are going to be in the opposite positions, or opposite rotations, I should say, of where they started. The one that was in front is now in back. The one that was in back is now in front. Something like that. So that's basically one step right there. See, the leg that was in back picks up, crosses over, and takes one step. Now, for this to be a cycle, he needs to end up back where he started. So I'll go one more second forward, put in my next crossover pose. So this one here is sliding back. This one here is picking up, crossing over. And then finally, 1 second after that, at 4 seconds, my character needs to end up in the same exact pose that he started in. So to do that, I'll copy and paste the keyframes. I can select my first keyframes, and then Command-C, Command-V to copy and paste the keyframes. So my first and last poses are identical. Now I'll set my work area by typing the letter N on the keyboard, and I'll load a quick preview. See how it looks. So 1 step, 2 step, and it's a cycle. So that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Now my timing is a little slow though. I did this at 1 second, intervals. So I'm gonna select all the keyframes and I'm gonna option drag them. Whoops, make sure I hold the option key first, and then option drag, and I'm gonna scrunch it to about 2 seconds to double the speed there. So again, Option key first and then drag the last keyframe to scrunch the timing together. I'll adjust my work area and take a look at that. So 2 seconds I think works better. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some additional animation to the upper body layers. So I'll go to the torso and hit R for rotation. And as he's walking, I think I'll have the torso kind of go back and forth. Now remember, you can use the J and the K keys on your keyboard to jump from keyframe to keyframe. So if you're wanting to synchronize your animation. And then remember to copy and paste the first keyframe, make the first and last poses the same. Now I'll do the same thing here with the arms. I'll show rotation for the arm layers, keyframe the rotation for the arms, and the arms are basically going to be doing the opposite of the legs. So if the character's left leg is in back, then its left arm is in front, and right leg in front, then the right arm is in back. So basically the opposite. And I'll go to the next middle pose here and switch them. And then again, making sure my first and last keyframes for those layers are the same so that it's a clean cycle, a clean loop. Now notice I've got a layer kind of intersecting through the character here. That's the stacking order of the layers. I'm going to move that arm layer below the leg layers so that it's behind them, and that should solve that problem. There we go. Okay, pretty good. And then lastly, I'll go to the head layer, and I'm going to animate the position of the head layer instead of the rotation. I'm going to have the head layer maybe move forward and back a little bit as he's walking. So keyframe position, go to my next keyframe, maybe move it back a little bit, and then forward. Oops. There we go. Again, I'm using the J and K keys on the keyboard to jump from keyframe to keyframe. And again, I'll make sure and copy and paste so the first and last poses are the same. All right, let me zoom out, do a preview, see how it looks. All right, that looks pretty cool. Last thing I want to do in terms of this animation is I'm going to add a little position to the upper leg layers. I'm going to have the hips kind of go back and forth a little bit. It'll make the walk look a little better. So I select the upper leg layer and do Shift P. Grab the other upper leg layer, do Shift P. And I'll set keyframes for the position for each of those upper leg layers. And basically, as he takes each step, I'm going to have this leg here is going to move forward a little bit. This leg here is going to move back. So there's a little bit of back and forth to the hips. And again, I will make the first and last poses the same by copying and pasting the position keyframes. All right, let's take a look and see how that is working. Okay, a little bit of position animation to the upper leg layers does help. So that looks pretty good, but the animation is kind of mechanical. It's linear. The keyframes are all linear keyframes. We talked about, keyframe types in one of the previous lessons, and linear keyframes just have a constant rate of change. Now, in previous lesson, we learned about Easy Ease keyframes, where we can select all of our keyframes, go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and choose Easy Ease. Let's see how that would look. That adds acceleration and deceleration to the keyframe speed values. And you can see the result, while it looks kind of cool, it's very springy, almost like a marionette. And the reason for that is because at each keyframe, not only is it rounding out the values, but it's also bringing the speed values all the way to 0. So it's almost like it's pausing for a slight moment at each position. So in this case, that's not really what I want. So what I'm wondering is there a way to round out the values and make the animation look smoother and less linear, but not affect the speed values? And of course there is, and that's what I wanted to show you here. It's called Auto Bezier keyframe. And the way we use it is we select all our keyframes, and then we hold the Command key down, or Control on the PC, and click any of the keyframes. And you see how the keyframe icon becomes a circle instead of a diamond. That is what we call the Auto Bezier type of keyframe. It's the same as the Easy Ease, but without changing the speed values. So basically it rounds out all the values on the value graph, but it doesn't affect the speed on the speed graph. It doesn't add any acceleration or deceleration to the speed. So the result is smoother motion, smoother movement, but without any speed change. So in this case, that works great. All right, I'm going to save what I've done. I haven't done a save yet. I'm going to save this out here to my desktop along with the Photoshop file that it's using. And now I'll continue on. I'm going to trim this composition to 2 seconds because there's all this empty space after the animation cycle that I don't need. So I set my work area at 2 seconds, and then I choose from the composition menu, trim comp to work area. That trims away the unnecessary, time on the timeline. Now I'm going to make another composition. I'm going to come up here to my composition menu and make a new composition. And this is going to be the main composition that I'm going to create my graphic in. The graphic that I'm going to create is going to be a lower third for my make-believe TV show, a lower third promo animation for my make-believe TV show. I'm calling it Spaceman. And I'll put in, for the name of the comp, I'll put in Spaceman lower third. And I'm going to use my HD 1080, 1920 by 1080. Where is it? Up here at the top. There we go. HD 1920 1080 29.97. So that's going to be the preset that I use. I'm going to put in 10 seconds for the duration. That's fine. And so I'm ready to go. I hit OK. I've got a new composition that is the HD frame size for the graphic that I want to create. Now I'm going to add the spaceman that I just animated, the element that I just made of that walk cycle. I'm going to drag that into this lower third composition. It's only 2 seconds long though, and I need it to last for longer than that. Now in a previous lesson, I did show how we could loop an animation by using what's called an expression script. I could do a similar thing here, but I'm going to do something a little bit easier. I'm going to use precomposing and duplicating as a way to create the loops that I need. So I'll select the layer, choose Edit Duplicate, or hit Command D. Then I will shift drag that layer over so that the in and out points snap together. Again, I hit Command D, shift drag, Command D, shift drag, and I repeat this process until I've duplicated that cycle and got enough loops to fill the 10 seconds. Now I don't want to have 5 different layers here, so here's where I'm going to do the precomposing to group these 5 loops all together. I select the 5 layers, I choose Layer, Precompose. I'm going to call this one Walk Loops and click OK. So that groups those 5 layers together into another composition. So I now actually have 3 compositions in this project. I've got the Spaceman comp, the one that I started in where I animated the cycle and trimmed it to 2 seconds. Now I've got this walk loops one that has 5 copies of that all sequenced out to create 10 seconds of walking. And then the main composition that I'm going to build in, the lower third. So now I'm going to make my lower third graphic. I'm going to click on my Guide and Grid button to show the proportional grid. That will give me a 4x6, or excuse me, a 6x8 grid that I can use to see where the top of the bottom third of my frame is. And I'll go ahead and scale my layer down. I hit S for scale, drop it down to about 25%, and I'm going to drag it down here so it's within the bottom third. Now I'm going to hit P for position, and I'm going to animate the position property of this layer to make the character look like he's walking across the frame from my right over to my left. So I set a couple position keyframes, and I'll hit play and see how it looks. All right, that looks pretty cool. He's walking across the bottom of the frame, but it's kind of slow, and I would like to speed everything up. So an easy way to speed up a layer so that I don't have to go into the pre-comp and start moving around keyframes or doing anything here, an easy way to speed this entire layer up is to use the stretch value. To get the stretch value, I'll right-click on the header bar in my timeline here, go to Columns, and choose Stretch. That will display the time stretch value. Time stretch allows you to speed up or slow down your layer. I'm going to bring the stretch value down to maybe around 4 seconds, about 40%. Notice that the entire layer, including the position keyframes that I had set, all get time compressed to become faster. I'll go ahead and hit play and see how it looks. Perfect, that's what I wanted. So I wanted the character to be walking faster and sliding faster. Now, if you need to, you can drag that second position keyframe around if you need to speed up or slow down the pan, but I think in this case it actually worked out pretty good. Now to finish up this little graphic that I'm creating here, I'm going to add a text layer. So I'm going to grab my type tool, I'm going to click, and I'm going to make a text layer and type in the name of my show and the day and time. Now it's using my last used font settings on this computer, which may not be very good. So let me come over here to the character panel, and I'm going to change my font. I'm just going to use Arial Bold, and I'm going to bring the font size up quite a bit. Oops, make sure I've got my layer selected when I do this. There we go. Oops, doesn't look like that font size stuck. Let me select the text. And there we go, Arial Bold. And I'll take a moment to, whoops, undo. To get out of the typing mode, switch back to the arrow tool. That can trip you up if you still have the type tool selected. All right, let's try this again. Arial Bold, there we go. And now if I do want to style the two lines separately though, I do need to switch back to the type tool. And then if I triple click, or double click, sorry, on the line of text, it'll select that whole line. I'm going to bring that one down, and then I'm going to double click that one and bring it up. There we go. And I think maybe I'll change the color of that line as well. And maybe this one I'll add a stroke color to it, and then add a little stroke width. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'll go with that. Switch back to my arrow tool to apply the text. Now the other thing I want to point out here is if I go to that grid and guide pop-up menu and choose title action safe, that will show me my broadcast margins, my 10 and 20% title and action safe margins. So I want to make sure that my text is inside of those margins so that it's, screen legal for broadcast work. And if I want to do an overall scale adjustment to the layer, I can select the layer, hit S for scale, and I can do an overall scale adjustment. So instead of using the font size, you can do an overall scale adjustment. Okay, now I want the text to follow the character as he walks out into the frame. So I'm going to use the parent and link feature to do that. I'm going to select the text layer and parent it to the character layer. That way, as the character comes out into the screen, the text follows behind him. Now, at a certain point, though, I do want it to stop following the character, maybe right about here. So to get it to stop following the character, what I need to do is cut that layer, make a cut in the layer so that part of it can be linked and part of it can be not linked. To do that, you put the time marker where you want to make your cut, you select your layer, and you choose Edit Split Layer. Then you turn off the parenting for the duplicate layer after the cut. So now the text will follow him out, and then it stops being linked and stops following him. Pretty cool. Now the only downside to the way I just did that, though, is I now have two text layers, and if I wanted to change my font styling, I would need to do it to both of the layers. A workaround on that would have been if I had precomposed the text layer first and then done the linking, the split layer, and so forth. All right, but in the interest of keeping this short, I'm just going to leave it like that. And the last element I'm going to add to this setup is to create a gradient to put behind this stuff. Because if I show the transparency grid background, and you can imagine that this is going to be, placed on top of some video in an editorial application, and it's going to be hard to read, hard to see. So I want to create a gradient color in the lower third to put behind this so it stays legible. Notice also that the top of the character's head is getting cut off. That's something I touched on in one of the earlier lessons when we pre-compose to create groups. Anything that's in the gray work area inside those groups will get cut off. The easy solution is to click this button called the collapse transformation switch. And you see how that solves that problem. All right, now to create my gradient, I'm going to use a shape layer. Zoom out a little bit here. I'm going to come up here to the toolbar and grab the rectangle tool. I'm going to deselect any layers because if I have a layer selected and I draw a rectangle, that's going to make a layer mask on that selected layer, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo. I'm going to deselect all my layers by clicking in the gray area or by choosing Edit, Deselect All. And then I'll use the rectangle tool to draw a rectangle in that lower third area. Because I don't have any layers selected, that creates a shape layer and fills it in with the fill and stroke values that we see here in the toolbar. So if I click on the word fill, it'll bring up a little window where I can choose either no fill, solid color, or one of these gradient fill options. I'll do linear gradient and click OK. Now to customize the color and opacity of this gradient fill, I'll click on this color swatch right here next to the word fill. That brings up the color picker and gradient editor. In the gradient editor, you can click on these tabs on the top to control the opacity values of your gradient, and you can click on these tabs on the bottom to control the colors. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a color, and for this end I'll pick a similar color, and then for the opacity on this end I'm going to leave it at 100, and on this end I'm going to put the opacity at 0, so it's going to go from a solid color to transparent. Now I'll click OK. That looks good, except the gradient is going the wrong direction and it's too short. So to change the direction and length of the gradient, I'll switch to the arrow tool, look closely, and you'll see two little blue dots. Clicking those blue dots will allow you to control where the gradient is starting and where it's stopping. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that up like that. Holding the shift key, by the way, while you drag will constrain the movement to straight lines. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, if I do want to go in and edit the gradient colors or the gradient again, I can just click on that swatch right up here. And I think what I'm going to do is bring that midpoint over. Actually, for the opacity, I'm going to bring the midpoint over a little bit like that, so it's a little bit sharper of a drop off. That looks cool. Now I'm going to put the gradient layer underneath my other layers like that, so it's behind them. And then I'm going to just do a simple animation here with the position, hitting P for position, and I want to have that gradient just maybe slide up from the bottom of the screen as the text and the character come out. So I'll set a keyframe and then I'll go back from there and bring it down off the bottom of the screen. Maybe I'll put an ease in on that second keyframe. There we go, that looks cool. And then at the end, I'm going to do a quick outro to get this to all go away. So at about 8 seconds, I think I'll animate the opacity of the shape layer. So I'll hold the shift key and hit T for opacity, keyframing that and doing a quick fade out at the end. Maybe an ease out on that keyframe. So it just fades out. And then I want the text to do something interesting. And what I showed in the class the other evening was how to use animation presets. If I find the Effects and Presets panel on my screen, at the very top of that, there's a group called Animation Presets. Animation presets are animations that have already been created that you can easily apply to a layer. And when you're getting started with text in this program, the animation presets for text are a great place to start. So I'll open up that animation presets, find the text group, and there's a group called Animate In and a group called Animate Out. And these are both very useful for doing title work. I'm going to grab that first Animate Out preset and I'm going to drag it to the text layer. When I do that, it applies whatever animation is saved in that preset to my layer. To see the keyframes, I can type the letter U on the keyboard, and that will show me any keyframes that were added by that preset. And then I can adjust the keyframes to control the timing. All right, let's go ahead and preview and see what it did. All right, pretty cool. Now, if I don't like that preset and I want to remove it, the best way to do that is doing Edit, Undo. So undo keyframe movement, and then I would need to do Undo, Apply. Undo, Apply. See, that would get rid of it. And then I could try a different one if I wanted to go through this list of other presets and find another one to try out. So I'm going to grab this one that says Twirl off each line, and I'll try that. See what that does. Ooh, that was neat. And again, if I hit the U key to show the keyframes, select my layer, hit the U key, there we go. Now, one of my keyframes does happen to be off the right side of my timeline, because when you apply a preset, it applies the keyframes to the right of your time marker. If that ever happens and you want to grab all the keyframes for that property so you can slide them over, click on the name of the property and then slide the keyframes over, and you can see, there was a keyframe that was off somewhere to the right. All right, I'll preview that, see how it looks. All right, I think I like that one, and I'll stick with that. Now, last thing I'm going to do here, just to make this look a little bit cooler, I'm going to grab the character layer And I'm going to throw one of those stylize effects on there to give it a more interesting look. Under Effect, Stylize, and I'm going to go with Find Edges. That makes him stand out a little better. It looks more like a cartoon. And that looks pretty good. Now, of course, from here, I can continue to add effects to layers, get creative with this, you know, maybe with the text layers, adding something like a drop shadow under Perspective, drop shadow, or Perspective, bevel alpha. Now, of course, I've got 2 copies of the text layers, so I would need to select these, copy and paste them onto the other instance of the text layer as well, just so it's the same. You can see that makes the text look a little bit nicer. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, the last thing I want to show in this demo is how to output what I've done as a high-quality QuickTime movie with the transparent background. Because if you render it as an MP4, like I showed in a previous lesson, you're not going to get the transparency. MP4 does not support alpha channels. So if you're rendering graphics that you've created in After Effects and you plan on bringing them into another program like Final Cut or Premiere, you need to render them in a format that supports alpha channels. So to do that, I'll click on my composition that I want to output. Use the checkerboard grid to make sure that your transparency is where it should be. If you click that button and you don't see a checkerboard pattern, then you know there's something wrong. One of your layers is filling it in. So once I've checked that though, I'll do File, Export, Add to Render Queue. That opens up the Render Queue panel. And for the output module, I'm going to click on the drop-down menu with the presets, and there's a preset called Lossless with Alpha. Now, if you're on the Mac, the default Lossless with Alpha settings need to be modified. Adobe has not updated it to the current standards for on the Mac. So if you click on Lossless with Alpha, it'll bring up the output module settings, and you'll see that for the format, it's using the old 32-bit Apple Animation codec. It'll still work, but this is kind of an obsolete compression codec. So by clicking on Format Options, the thing you want to change is the video codec setting. Change it from Animation to ProRes 4444. Like that. Click OK. Click OK to get out of that settings window. And then last but not least here, click the Output to file path. Tell it where you're rendering it to and what you're naming it. And I think it's a good idea when you render graphics with alpha channels to put in with alpha in the file name. So I'm going to go ahead and render this to my desktop. And then I hit the render button, and away it goes. So by rendering an Apple ProRes 4444 movie, this will render a high-quality QuickTime MOV file with the alpha channel intact, and it will support up to the 64-bit higher dynamic range color, or sorry, I should say not 64-bit, 16-bit if you're doing 16-bit color. If you're doing an HDR workflow, the ProRes codec will support that. The old Apple Animation one won't. Now, when the render's done, it plays that chiming noise. The status now says done. You can close the render queue. I'll save my work. And I'll go ahead and close the project and come back out here to my desktop and find my rendered movie. There it is. And looks like I had a stroke value turned on for that shape layer. See, good thing to check your work. But if I want to check the transparency, I could bring that file back into After Effects, that rendered movie, double click it to open it up, and then click the transparency grid button. And as long as I see that transparency, I know that that rendered file is good. Now in my example here, like I said, I accidentally have a stroke value turned on for that layer. So let me find my project panel, my project file, I should say. Open it back up and go to that shape layer. Go to the stroke option up here and turn off the stroke option. And then I'll need to re-render it. So that will solve that problem. So adding it back to the render queue. Again, I did lossless with alpha, modified the settings to the ProRes 4444. Hit OK. I'm going to render it out here to my desktop again, replacing the previous one. And that should do the job. All right. Hopefully that gives you some ideas for further, animation stuff as far as using the parent and link feature, using the Auto Bezier type of keyframes. We also introduced the effects and presets animation preset group for adding preset animations to your layers, especially useful for getting started with text. And then lastly, how to render graphics with an alpha channel, with a transparency channel, so you can bring those graphics into other programs like Final Cut or Premiere. All right, let me check my work. So here's the newly rendered file. Open it up and hit play. And there we go. No more white stroke line along the top of the rectangle. And again, if I want to check the transparency, I can bring it into After Effects and double check there. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.